welcome to today's Water Cooler Chat, Mental Health in High Performance Environments, hosted by Virtual Patent Gateway and moderated by Michelle Apsen, Senior Patent Counsel of Unified Patents. Virtual Patent Gateway founder Ashley Chung has a passion for supporting young creatives in the workplace and is committed to developing a growth mindset within VPG. Joining us today is two-time Canadian Olympic skeleton athlete Jane Channell. This webinar will be recorded for future use. And with that, I'll hand things off to Michelle.
Okay, and as Caitlin mentioned, Jane Channell is a professional skeleton racer out of North Vancouver. Over a decade of experience in a sport where you hurl yourself down a hill of ice at nearly 90 miles per hour. So she certainly has had her share of high pressure experiences. For anyone tuning in live, as Jane mentioned, we'd love your questions, your input. We feel like we can all learn from each other. So if you feel that there is something we could take away from your experiences, don't hesitate to chime in. Or if you have any questions or follow-ups to something that one of us says, again, you could either raise your hand or just unmute yourself and chime in. We're hoping for this to be kind of interactive and low-key conversational. So Jane, with that, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, what led you to skeleton racing, just so that we have that framework?
For sure. So first of all, thank you for having me and thank you everyone for joining. I'm really honored to be here today and I've been asked to speak with you guys today. And so how I got into skeleton, growing up, I was a multi-sport athlete, played soccer, softball, basketball, volleyball, ran track and field, you name it. And I was playing it. And it wasn't until university where I had to narrow down my focus. And so I ended up being a sprinter on the track and field team. As well, I played softball I was a freshman senior on the softball team there. And it was back in my second year though, back in 2009. And my boyfriend at the time, we had talked about anything and everything, our futures, like where we were going to live, just everything I had thought of in the future involved him. But in the fall of 2009, he passed away. He had an unknown heart condition. And you hear about those athletes that just drop dead during their sport. And that's essentially what happened to him. And so I went from flying high, being on cloud 9 to rock bottom in the matter of a second. My whole future, everything I had to look forward to is now gone. And so I really had to dig deep, so to speak, and to try and figure out what it is I wanted to do. And the only thing that I knew of was sport and competition. And so when I graduated university in the spring of 2011, I wasn't done with sport. I wasn't done competing. I'm not going to lie, I was still lost. And I looked back and what Bernie had always challenged me to do was to dream big and then to dream even bigger. And so Vancouver had just hosted the 2010 Olympics. So they still had the legacy facilities. And so in the fall of 2011, I moved up to Whistler without ever having tried skeleton before and said, this is what I'm going to do. So I lived in Whistler for 2 years where I started out from zero and then made my way up onto the Canadian development team in my second year, where I actually somehow won that entire circuit. So as a second year slider, that never really happens. And so I thought, okay, I'm not bad at this. So I moved up to Calgary where I currently am in my third year of sliding and kept sliding, kept competing, and just gradually worked my way up there, where I was then named the Olympic team in 2018 to go compete for Canada in PyeongChang in South Korea. And then after that Olympics, which was incredible, I felt like I wasn't done. I felt like I had unfinished business. And so I training, kept competing, and then again was named to, well, I guess then COVID happened. And we all know the challenges that COVID brought. And so that was just a whole other obstacle really. And so was able to persevere and get through that and was named to the Beijing 2022 Canadian team again. And now I'm here.
Wow. So it sounds like you had a lot of drive coming from Bernie, both pre and post-mortem. And that sounds like a big part of what took you from like the bottom of the mountain to the top, so to speak. Do you feel like you draw inspiration from anyone else or anything else as like you are going through periods of lows and highs as you're competing?
Definitely, yeah. So I'm involved with a few different organizations. One of them being one called Classroom Champions. And so the founder recognized the impact that an athlete can have essentially on a classroom or a school by doing one talk. But the whole premise behind it is that would maybe only last for like a day, maybe a week tops kind of thing. But the premise behind Classroom Champions is that you're paired with classrooms throughout the entire school year, where you're then able to have that kind of lasting impact and influence on them. And so I think for me now, one of my key driving factors for continuing to slide is to be able to inspire someone else, like how Bernie inspired me to challenge myself. And I want to do that for the next generation, because being female, I'm half Japanese, so being a kind of a visible minority as well, I think it's really impactful for others to see perhaps themselves like me achieving and going out there for it.
So kind of paying it forward in a way pushes you forward in a pretty big way, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So but what is it about like the kind of competition that skeleton brings that draws you? It sounds like you played a lot of different sports, both team and individual, but except for maybe sprinting, and actually including sprinting, skeleton is so much different. What draws you specifically to that type of competition?
Yeah, so I guess when I first going back again, when I first heard of skeleton, I was watching the Salt Lake City Olympics with my grandpa. And just like kind of how you see on TV now, the sleds that zip by on TV, he turned to me after a few sleds had gone by with this like look of utter disgust. And he was like, they're crazy. And so honestly, the seed was planted back then. And so just kind of, again, being in the right place at the right time, really is what inspired me to want to try skeleton. So I didn't know anything really about it until I moved up to Whistler for it. And so I think the speed was one thing that's something that I really love. Being able to try and find that perfect run, but that perfect run doesn't exist. So it's like you're on the pursuit of the impossible, essentially. And for some reason, like I really enjoy that.
No, I definitely can relate to that. There's like in some contexts you have to remind yourself, like as you're pursuing the perfect, like if you don't reach it, it's not a failure, just the pursuit. There's no such thing as the two extremes of utter failure and absolute perfection. So it's funny that you mentioned that. So you mentioned being kind of like a hidden minority. Has that ever impacted your goals in any way, or has it driven you in any way? Because I actually didn't know that until today. And I did my research, but I didn't know. So I was curious.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate in that it's never hindered me in any way. Like my parents, they made sure that I was able to partake in any opportunity or any sports team that I wanted to. And so that it's never really crossed my mind for it to come up as something that would hinder me. But it was funny because I've never actually had to stop and think about it. So I've been really fortunate in that sense. I've always been treated equal. But when I was at Beijing, actually, I had a message from a teacher from back east that I'd never talked to ever before. It was just a random message. And she was saying that their class was doing a project on BIPOC athletes, and that I fell in that category. And is that okay if they could share with me what their students came up with? And I honestly had a bit of a identity crisis, because I'm a person of color, being Japanese, and I do fall in that category, but I've never had to think about it. I've never had to stop and or have anything hold me back because of it. And so I just being I guess now recognizing that and being a part of that group, I would hope that I'm able to show those younger generations, those younger folks, that it doesn't matter what skin color you are, it doesn't matter where you come from. Like, it's great to recognize your background, but by all means, go for it. Like, dream big, continue to push yourself, and you never know where you can end up or where you can go if you don't try.
Yeah. Wow. That's really cool. So I wanted to kind of talk about performing under pressure a little bit. A lot of people on this call work in litigation. And like most sports, it's like litigation, sports are inherently adversarial. Your win is another's loss, and vice versa usually. And skeleton is uniquely solo. You're racing others, but you're on the track by yourself and kind of competing against the time. And so what is your approach in setting your racing goals when you know that you are going to be stacked against others, and your win is another, and vice versa?
Yeah, it's skeleton is something where you can get caught up in everyone else's drama or what everyone else is doing, but you have to focus on yourself. So that's where it becomes more of a selfish type of sport, I guess. Like, it's definitely one of the most like self-centered sports I've been a part of, but you have to, because it's so easy to get caught up in things that you can't control. And so it's so important, like anything else in life, like that you have to focus on only the things you can control. And it's how you respond to situations that you can't control, which will kind of determine how you yourself will do, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, for sure, there really only is one winner, unless you come down to a tie, 200th of a second, which is very hard to do. So someone is always going to be a winner and someone is always going to be the loser. And so, again, it's only focusing on what you can control, and knowing that obviously you're going out each day and doing the very best that you can. Sometimes that's enough and sometimes that's not. And that's totally okay. We're all human. We can all make mistakes. And that's all anyone can ever ask for, is just for you to go out there and try your best.
So you mentioned it's inherently selfish, but from what I've read about you, it seems like you really seek out making it as selfless as you can, doing the Classroom of Champions, and also you do have other women on your team and younger up and coming athletes. And so does helping others find their way, do you think that advances your goals, or what is the motivation there to take this sport that's inherently selfish and still apply the golden rule to your team and others?
Definitely, like, for sure, coming from the team sports myself, I find this is one of the hardest things for me is that individual aspect of skeleton. And so I know from experience that the more you work together as a team, the better everyone is, whether it just be from like the team culture aspect, but just you yourself, your skills, your teammates' skills, like Canada as a whole, their skills will therefore be better. And so it's hard because you are pitted head to head against your teammates essentially. And so it does come down to like, how can I help lift them to be their best while also ensuring that I'm at my best? So it's kind of walking that fine line in knowing, like in skeleton, you always have like that ace of spades in your pocket that you don't really share with people. So it's sharing, but not oversharing or not overstepping those boundaries. And so it's you want the nation to do well. That's the whole goal, is for Canada to do well at the Olympics or World Championships or whatever event it is. There's definitely in skeleton, there's some tracks that suit athletes over other athletes. And so it's perhaps finding that set of runners or that fast line that you share to that athlete that is going to be better than you down the track. And knowing that you're giving them that edge, but that in turn will become a medal for Canada. And then they in turn can hopefully return the favor on a track that you're better at than them. And so it is a give and take. It's a lot of trust. And hopefully the team culture is able to support that and allow for that kind of teammate and camaraderie to flourish.
So this may bring out something about me. And before I continue, a couple of people have joined since we brought this up, but at the beginning of the call, we mentioned that this is a conversational conference. And so if you have any input or any questions for Jane, feel free to unmute yourself, feel free to raise your hand or throw something into the chat, which I actually realized I should have open and I don't, so I'm going to do that now. And just feel free to interact with us because we want to hear your thoughts. We think we could learn from you and to also know what you would like to hear from Jane. But going into that other aspect, when my big sports have always been softball and volleyball, and especially beach volleyball. And there's definitely, when it comes to your team, like finding that synergy where you can lift each other. And so one thing that I always did with my partner was make eye contact between each point. Win or lose the point, you make eye contact just to remind each other, like, we're in this together. But there was also literally somebody like in opposition on the other side of the net that tried to act as a wall to us. And so I got a lot of energy from rivalries and acting as if that person was my enemy for this 25 points or 21 points, whatever the game was. And I'm always curious if that applies in the racing context, or does Canada, or do you ever use that to get energy, or does it actually end up just draining you at that high level?
I know for sure that some athletes thrive and try and create that kind of rivalry atmosphere. To be quite honest, I don't like that. I don't appreciate it either. And so if someone is trying to do that, like trying to create me as like, or pit me as the bad person or like the rival, I'll just disengage. I won't even give them the time of day because I need to do what I need to do in order to be at my best. What they're doing is for them to be at their best. And by all means, you have the power to do that, but it had better not affect me. So there was a really cool exercise that we did to just kind of demonstrate this. So we were partnered up with one of our teammates, it didn't matter who, and they put an orange on the middle of the table, and we were each given a card. And on the card, for instance, mine read, you need to work with your partner without directly saying it, but you need to get the most peel out of the orange. And theirs said the same thing, but they need to get the most juice out of the orange. And so you both have that same goal where you both need the orange, but you both need different things. And that's recognizing it is one thing. And then how can you, if you're able to communicate with each other what you need to be in your ideal environment or mindset, then you know that what they're doing or what they're saying is not like a personal attack against you. It's just, that's how they work. That's how they function. That's how they're wired. And that's totally different. And so it's having that open conversation, I think, as well, which is really important. And that kind of falls back on trust and having that team culture to be able to have those perhaps tough conversations around that, just to, again, lay out the boundaries. Yeah,
that's a great. I was a resident advisor in college, and we did a similar experiment where you were communities, and one community was really into a currency system they had, and the other community had a currency system, but really what they were all about were uh, affectionate interactions, like just like the personal interactions with people. And so they would be happy to like give you their fake currency. They couldn't tell each other that because they spoke a different language, and eventually you'd have to realize like what is it that drives the other community so that we can all live in kind of harmony. But it's a hard exercise, and nobody got it at the end in that particular context, because without being able to communicate, nobody ever understood each other or their goals. You've mentioned in interviews that when you race, you try to focus on your process and not on outcome, and the idea being that if your process is there, then the outcome will come. So like your form and how you approach the race. Do you think this philosophy is ever applied in like day-to-day life, work, and anything else?
I 100% think so, because if you don't have a process, you guys are being in law there. Like if you say, I'm going to win this trial, how are you going to win it? That's your process. So if you have your process in place, and taking those necessary steps, A, B, C, perhaps you need to take a V at the fork or whatever it is, and take a different route to get there. But that's your process and how you're going to win, or that's the process to get the result that you want. And so like skeleton, because it is such a fast paced sport, if you don't have a process, you're going to be going down the track and just hitting walls and not achieving what you want, and therefore your result isn't going to be there. And so going down the track, corner by corner, essentially step by step, it allows you to have those mini, like those smaller, like we'll call them super short-term goals, so that you can reach your long-term goal. And I find that for me, that's necessary in anything and everything from schoolwork to work to getting those reports done, or gosh, anything. I think that's super important. Yeah, I'm a firm believer in focusing on the process and not the outcome.
So when you go to the process and you, let's say you fall a little bit off course in your way, what kind of mindset or approach do you try to take to not hold on to that, but go to the next mini goal, or readjust for the next mini goal?
Definitely, yeah. So in skeleton, like you can have plan A, B, C, and D, but because you're going so fast, you really don't have time to stop and dwell on what you messed up on in corner 2, because you'll be in corner 7. So you just have to, if it's a failure or whatever it may be, just accept it, take what you can from it, throw away the rest, and move on. There's never going to be a straight line from A to Z. You're always going to have ups and downs, zigzags, and potholes along the road, really. So it's how you manage them and how you are able to modify where you can while still keeping that long-term goal in mind, but focusing on how can you get from A to B to C to D.
I'm hearing a lot of stoic philosophy, in that like the past is outside of your control, so you've got to discard that. You can't hang on to it. Do you look to philosophy to help, like formal philosophy or informally to help shape, or does it kind of just naturally come like, oh, like I've met people who seemed naturally unflappable, as they say, and I am not. I would like listen to like little stoic mantras and try to repeat themselves to remind myself to be that way. And I'm curious how that comes to you.
I think it's been like forced on me. whether I want it or not, because like just going back to the whole Bernie thing, I didn't want him to die, but he did. Kind of, that sounds like so crude and harsh, but like it's forced me to become fluid. And same with COVID, like COVID happened and like you had to become fluid with all the new processes and changing rules. And we were still trying to travel to all these different countries and still remain within their protocol while still not catching COVID and all this stuff. So you had to become fluid. And so as well, just I guess maybe I do work with with sports psychologists as well. So I've had a couple, and it's perhaps maybe that athlete mindset where if you dwell on something, it's just really, it's not of any use. Like it's just a waste of energy. And so and as well, like from Bernie, he would always it just makes you appreciate life and how fragile life is. And so just living in the moment all the time and being grateful for what's in front of you and being present. I think for me is just something that I've kind of come to acknowledge and to live by. I've never actually taken a philosophy course or anything like that. So, I mean, if that's the views and stuff that I'm coming across, then maybe I need to look more into it. I'm kind of curious now.
Well, it's interesting because it's not that you're putting a positive spin on everything. It's that it's more of a productive isn't the right word either. Maybe I should take a philosophy course too. But it's a realistic approach to what you can to acceptance and what you can do going forward, how you grow from something. And so that's really powerful, I think. Do you ever feel like, well, is it do you ever feel like when so for example, you're also working in environmental consulting and taking courses, do you feel like applying it in the skeleton context is a little bit easier or harder than applying it, for example, if you get like a bad grade or you get some negative feedback at work? Like, is the approach the same, do you think, or different?
Yeah, I think it'd be the same. Like any kind of essentially for skeleton, we're going out every day when we train. We go out to fail because that fast line down the track is that fine line between of being in control and out of control. And the only way to find it is by actually failing. And so I'm used to failure all the time and getting the critical feedback about where like the silly little things like keep your head low, keep your shoulders down, keep form. Like none of that's applicable to literally real life. The concept of like receiving feedback and how to apply it is though. And so it's definitely helped me in my professional work and stuff. I do try and keep them quite separate just to be able to have that escape from skeleton or from work in the summertime. So they kind of flip flop back and forth depending on the season, like what's my hobby and what's actually work kind of thing. And so it is interesting to stop and think about it. But I mean, there are theories that do apply across both, but it's how you would kind of apply it that would be different.
So you mentioned you aim to fail. So what does that look like in skeleton? Like what is considered a failure?
Absolutely smashing a wall or flipping.
Oh my God. That's terrifying.
Yeah. So like you want to like, because in some corners or a lot of corners, you want the height in the corner to be able to dive and shoot out and gain more velocity or more momentum. And so sometimes you hit the roof and you can get deflected down earlier than you want. And so what goes up must come down, and you end up sometimes like running out of corner, essentially, if that makes sense. And so as the corner's coming down, you might be rising still. And then that's when you would hit walls or you would just flip. But it's through that learning though, that you would only really find out what are the limits of the corners. So it's kind of the same going across into a work world where Like you kind of have to find out what are your limits. Like perhaps your limits could be like how many hours you work in a week, or how many like hours of sleep you need. Like there's ways to test limits to in order for you to be at your best, from skeleton, but also to work. And so it can apply as well to kids at school. Like what's that balance of them having time to relax during the day, or what's the balance of them needing to perhaps exercise and get outside and play more for them to sleep better at night. So it's finding that balance. And sometimes you have to fail to find that balance, and that's okay.
So I think a lot of people have a paralyzing fear of failure. And as a recent example for me, I had reached out for a reference for something, and in applying for Unified, I needed a reference for something, and I was very afraid that they would say no, or, and this is the worst, that they would say yes, but secretly give me a bad one. I had no reason to believe that they would, but feel of failure applies in applying for jobs, in asking somebody out, in going to your first skeleton race and deciding, hey, let me just go down Whistler Mountain and see how I do. Or asking a coach to take you on as a client or as a player. So have you ever had to overcome this fear of failure or rejection? And how do you do that? What is the approach you take for that?
Yeah, so I honestly, a lot. I had to fail a lot or hear no a lot when I was fine. So skeleton, we're pretty much like a self-funded sport, pretty much. We don't get a lot of support from our federation. And so I'm constantly looking for sponsorships. And so how many cold calls have I made where I just don't hear back, or it's just a flat out no? A ton. There's so many times. And yeah, it can get discouraging and it can be exhausting. But at the end of the day, this is where like the mindset part of it comes up, is if they say no, are you better off than where you were before they said no? Like, no, you're where you were before. But if they say yes, that's the win that you'd be getting, is that you will never know unless you ask. So you will hear a lot of no's. And for sure that fear of rejection, like you mentioned, perhaps asking for that reference. Yeah, it's a very human response and fear to have. But getting pushed outside your comfort zone for the off chance that they do say yes, or for that benefit from that yes, should far surpass the fear of not asking at all, if that makes sense. So it's just a mindset. Like, how can you kind of like trick your mind into like thinking in that way? And honestly, I think it's just a practice, and then that practice becomes a habit. And so you'll get used to, I think it's just putting yourself out there and just being brave, to be quite honest. And I know that's hard. But just try and it'll get easier.
Yeah, I think everybody needs to hear that sometimes. I think, so I finally did do the thing I was afraid to do. And there were two things that prompted me. One, somebody else asked me to be a reference for just a coincidence. And I realized I would never throw anybody under the bus. Why would I assume somebody would throw me under the bus? And I also had no reason, but also a LinkedIn post, someone's posted saying like, stop self-rejecting. If you apply for the job and you don't get it, you don't get the job, you're no worse off, just like you said. But if you apply for the job and you get it, you got a job. And so it's very rare that a no actually hurts you. And so why are people afraid of that? So I love your response. So I'm kind of shifting gears here, because I've always been curious about this, and you don't get many opportunities to ask an Olympian about this. But so you and I happen to be around the same age, and so we went through this transition where growing up, you have to have a face-to-face interaction to meet some stranger, let alone hear their opinions about the world, about you, about anything. To, you know, in the teens, like starts becoming kind of bigger. And now is is a primary way of connecting with people and hearing everyone's good and bad opinions about everything. And so I'm curious about how this may have affected your mental well-being, both good and bad in the past. And how do you approach social media in everyday life while training?
Yeah, so Instagram, I'm not on TikTok. I refuse to get TikTok, but
I do too.
Instagram for sure. Like there's benefits and there's a ton of like negative aspects of it. I think a lot of, I've definitely had to put myself on like Instagram timeouts because of just the amount of perfectionism that exists. I'll put perfectionism in air quotes because everyone only seems to post the good things, like the perfect things, the Photoshop photos, the ideal like ice cream date or like whatever it may be. It's always only perfect. But there's those like face filters that are obviously going around right now that are showing just the reality behind them, that no one is perfect, that those faces that you see are not probably that are perfect, that are probably not the faces that actually exist behind that filter. And so it's fascinating the amount of people that you've seen kind of like jumping on that bandwagon of trying to show the difference. And so it's kind of the same thing that I try to look at Instagram with, where knowing that everyone has their own stuff going on behind the scenes, everyone's fighting their own fights, and they're kind of using Instagram as like a mask or as a barrier to, whether it's to like try and convince themselves that their life is perfect or that they're not unhappy or whatever it may be. But I don't know. I take everything with a grain of salt on Instagram. I will often go through there, and if there's an account that doesn't serve me purpose anymore, like whether they be friends, whether they be teammates, whether they be colleagues, like just randoms that you follow or whatever, if they no longer serve me, I will no longer follow them, because if they make me feel self-conscious about myself or are like backhandedly putting me down because I'm not achieving the same things that they are, like I have no time for that. I really don't care. So it's a matter of like self-filtering out and only following accounts that better your life. There's no point in following accounts or anything like that, or listening to comments that don't lift you. And I think that there's so many trolls out there that just say stuff just to get a rise out of people. And like, I know myself. So on YouTube, there's that video of me hitting a broom. Back in 2016, I think it was, I hit a broom in a race. And it was not my fault. It was snowing. The track worker stepped out late and they just dropped the broom. And I was like roasted on bar down, was on TSN's, which is like the sports network, like Canada's version of like a big sports network. TSN's worst plays of the month, worst plays of the year. Like it was all over the like world news. But it wasn't necessarily because I hit a broom. It was because my rerun that I took was slower than the broom run. And it was because it was snowing. If I like hindsight 2020, if I had just accepted that broom run as it was, then I should have just taken that one, because the track will slow down the more snow that's in the track, obviously. And so I got roasted big time because of that. And so that video on YouTube has like over 15 million views. And when it first came out, some of the comments on there were just awful. Like, and I would catch myself just going through and scrolling through them, like just like degrading comments and just like, just very like stereotypical things, being like, oh, you're a woman, like get back in the kitchen. And I'm like, what is happening right now? Like, no, like you go in the kitchen, like, sir. And so I had to just monitor myself and not read them. And so same thing with Instagram, is if it doesn't serve you purpose, if it brings you down, makes you feel, pardon my English, but makes you feel like shit, then why are you fueling that fire? There's no point. So that's my take on my rant on Instagram and that.
So I will never forget. It was um, it was an interview of Venus Williams, and she's still amazing, but like compared to what she was in her prime, she's technically in her twilight, but she's still amazing. And so there's Naomi Osaka, who's an up and coming US player who has dealt with a lot of mental health issues, and she's made public statements about it. She doesn't love doing the press. And someone asks Venus, well, how do you deal with the press? Because like we have this Naomi situation where she's just dropped out of a tournament because they're making her do interviews. How do you deal with it? And Venus says, oh, I just remember anytime any one of you asks me a question that I don't like, that I would whoop your butt on the court any day, any year, like for the rest of my life. And it was funny, but it was also, she had grown through all of that, and that was how she responded. And so it's, when I watched that video, I don't remember the announcer, I think maybe British or Australian or something, but they immediately said, oh, she's definitely going to want to redo this. Like, so I assume the announcers have a better idea of what some random YouTuber, and so you redid it. So it seemed like the right call at the time. You got hit by a broom, why not try? So it's always funny to me when I think about like even on like Reddit, like subreddits for sports, that's another type of social media, or YouTube or anything, like you don't know what you're talking about. why say something? But I think it's smart that you're not trying to dwell on those comments, because you'd kick any of those people's butts if they tried to do the skeleton. They probably couldn't.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny. I saw there was like a TV show or something where I can't remember where it was, but like a sports network actually called out fans that were like bashing. It was like a NFL football like kicker that missed like an easy field goal, and they called out the average Joe people that were bashing this poor athlete, and they had these people come out and attempt the exact same kick, and like none of them made it. And they're like, well, why are you like, what are you doing then, like saying that anyone can make it if you can't even make it? And so it's super interesting. Like if you try and like anyone on social media, if you ever get any kind of read any of those comments that are meant for you or directed at you, like try and put it into a different perspective, or put it into a perspective kind of thing. But as well, like if they don't know the situation, they don't know all of that's going on. And so like I would just ignore them or just block them or whatever, just to get rid of them. It's not a big deal.
So that kind of leads into the next question I was going to ask. So like, what advice do you have for up and coming public figures, either athletes or just somebody who's starting to become in the field, like entering their primes or their profession under a social media spotlight? And like social media it's LinkedIn, it's Reddit, it's YouTube, it's Facebook, it's Instagram, it's TikTok, it's everything where you can interact with a stranger. What approaches have worked for you? It sounds like stepping away, but like what advice would you have for them as they approach that social media spotlight?
I would just say to be yourself, be authentic, show what it is like behind the scenes, like the hard days, the good days, the struggles, like be human. And like it makes you more relatable. And in turn, like you'll be able to, you might gain perhaps less of a following if you post like the bikini photos all the time or whatever, but you're going to be gaining the more like real and authentic followers that you're going to want to probably associate with anyway. So it's how you want to build your brand, and it's how you carry out that process to do so, which will really help you to surround yourself by those who are going to lift you, and they're not just going to tear you down like perhaps some of those other people would. And so I think my advice for sure would just to be yourself and be like unapologetically yourself. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. It matters if you're happy, post it. If you're sad, post it. Like you don't have to be perfect, I think. Yeah.
Do you think that being authentic has helped other people, like you doing that has helped other people, do the same thing?
Yeah, like I think so. It builds, again, it builds that community around yourself, and it allows you to be relatable in a way where you can then create some kind of mini support groups, whether it's intended to or not. Like I had kind of on topic, but like I had done a school presentation, and I'd spoken about Bernie, and I had a teacher come up to me afterwards and say, thank you, because their daughter went through that same thing with their boyfriend and everything, had passed away, and they never understood it. They could never really relate to them afterwards. And so after hearing my story, and that allowed them to get the insight, get the intel without having that because if you only talk about it if you want to talk about it. And so if they weren't ready to talk about it, then that parent would never be able to get that insight. So by getting that from me, you're then as well being able to help other people with perhaps same or similar circumstances. And so it's the same thing with Instagram. It's just a way of how can you tell your story and inspire or help others around you, if that's what your goal is. And so by doing that, you'll be able to create that uplifting community around you.
Yeah, that's really powerful. That's a powerful example. Because it's not just creating. I found that sometimes when I articulate how I'm feeling about something, or when I hear somebody else articulate how they're feeling about something that is similar to something I've gone through or am going through, I might not have known my own feelings until I heard somebody put it into words. And I know I've done that for others too. Like I'm frustrated because I feel disregarded or whatever the negative feeling is. And when you articulate it, somebody else can empathize better, whether or not they've experienced it. And so it's interesting how that authenticity builds your community, because you're kind of teaching others how to know what they're feeling and know what others are feeling, and others are feeling too. So shifting gears again, one thing we actually touched on this a little bit already, was aiming to fail. Like one of those things that applies to everyday life is learning how much you can put into something. And so you've emphasized work ethic and in getting through struggle, being the best you can be. And so I'm curious, do you ever have to turn off from racing, or are there other hobbies or practices that you turn to help maybe refocus when you're feeling like your work ethic is fading, or does it never fade?
It fades. Yeah, no, it does. And like that's the human part. Like everyone is at risk of burning out. And so like you said, like how can you come up with strategies, or what can you do to ensure that you don't? And so for me, being able to work as well as the same time as slide is something that really helped me, because in the summertime, I work full time. And so therefore skeleton turns into a hobby. In the wintertime, when I'm sliding full time, work then becomes the hobby. And so it flip-flops and it works really well together. But I mean, so I'm pretty busy, but like, my gosh, I do enjoy just a day, like in my pajamas, crushing Netflix and eating all the junk food. Like that's totally like my ideal weekend, to be quite honest. But like being able to unwind and just unplug your phone, like everything as well, is just super important, just to reground yourself and to refocus. And that's going to be different and look different for everybody. And it's going to be like perhaps a trial and error type of thing to figure out what works best for you. Another thing for me is, has anyone here actually tried those sensory deprivation tanks, those giant saltwater tanks? If you have not, then like I would recommend them. They are absolutely amazing. You just literally lie in probably like 8 inches of super salty water. And that sounds so silly, but you just, I don't know why, it's just so relaxing. And so I would go check one of those out if you're feeling like super, like you can't calm down and what your normal routine is just isn't working. I would definitely try that. It's a good reset. As well, getting out in nature just is another really good one. Finding the time to just sit and listen to the birds or feel the wind against your face or the rain, whatever it may be, is just, it's revitalizing. So I would say those for me are my main ones, for sure.
I have never done a sensory deprivation tank.
You haven't? I would honestly, I would do it. I challenge you. I challenge you.
Okay. Follow up. I don't even know where you do that. But how long do you do it for?
They usually have set appointments, so they can range anywhere from like 60 minutes to like, gosh, there's some that are like 3 hours long. But they're, because you're in full control of the environment, and so you can have the lights on, you can have them off. Sometimes they're in like these big like kind of clamshell pod things, and you can have the lid open or you can have it closed. You can ask them to increase the temperature of the water or whatever as well. Like you're in full control of it. And so anyone, I've heard a lot of people say like, I'm claustrophobic, I can't do it. And like, it doesn't feel like you're in an enclosed space because of how dark it is. You can't honestly see anything. And that sounds like kind of creepy and scary as well, but it allows your body to get into that recovery mode of the parasympathetic nervous system a lot faster. And so, I mean, sometimes I just end up having a nap in there.
Yeah, that's what I would think. It sounds like a really good way to take a nap.
Yeah. Honestly, like quite often I just fall asleep, and that's totally fine as well, but because that's just your body telling you that you need more sleep, you need more time to recover. And so sometimes you'll kind of go into like a trancey, like Zen mode where you'll have these like massive epiphanies go on, or like sometimes you'll cry. I've cried so many times in there. Like sometimes you're just frolicking around like a jellyfish. Like each time is different. And so it's kind of cool to just give yourself that time to explore and see if it's something that you like doing or not.
Okay, but I'll try to do that here within the year is my goal, and then I'll follow up with you.
Yes, please do.
I like the challenge. Yeah, I'm curious if anybody else has anything. I really love listening to audiobooks and walking on a trail with my dogs now. Those hanging out with my dogs and listening to an audiobook, like just something that is a removal from reality temporarily, is something that helps me reset when I'm stressed or like I haven't been able to get sleep or something. So, but everybody needs something, and maybe sensory deprivation tank will be a new thing.
Yeah. I'm curious if anyone else here wants to come off mute and just share, like, what is your way of how do you unwind or decompress or like reground yourself? If anyone wants to unmute and share, that'd be awesome.
I'll start. This is Ashley. So I actually do love walking. So I'll go to like the local elementary school for like the trails or the track this morning, for example. I've been under a lot of stress and haven't really gone out walking for a bit. But this morning I made myself go out there, and it was so awesome because I saw that the little kids, they were like, all the chalks was basically written all over the track. I have an awesome summer, and it was like, congrats, we are done with 5th grade. I'm like, yeah, you still have a lot of kids. They were like, all the chalks was basically written all over the track. I have an awesome summer, and it was like, congrats, we are done with 5th grade. I'm like, yeah, you still have a long way to go. But that's my way of like sort of resetting. And I do listen to audiobooks and podcasts and stuff like that. So that's my way. And I will stop talking and let other people talk now.
Jess,
I love that.
Jess mentioned in the chat exercise and like walking. I know for a fact Jess loves spinning, cycling, and a couple of our other coworkers have Pelotons and love to do that, which that one wasn't my thing because I get very competitive, and so I like try to get like top 25% or whatever of like the people doing the thing, and so it's not a good way to relax for me, but it is really fun. I know, but exercise seems like a pretty common one, either light or intense. So I was curious if you have any mantras you go through or routines you go through when things go wrong or you're having trouble and you need to recenter yourself, like, oh, Kelly hiking, snowboarding, but exercise. Kelly's a very good snowboarder.
Oh, wow.
But mantras, and this is like for anybody in the group, like what's something that you kind of tell yourself to get yourself back on track. And I'll kind of start. I don't actually do a mantra, but when I find that I'm getting frustrated, I will do a quick math problem in my head to kind of just distract me, and then solve one simple problem, like a little bit hard, but not too easy, but like something that I actually have to think about for 10 seconds. And then I'll focus on the next problem. And I'm curious if anybody else has anything that they do to recenter.
I'll go next, and then I would love to hear from others as well on this. For me, I will breathe. I will do some box breathing stuff, or just like kind of zone out and like go to my happy place as well. But as well, some mantras that I always fall back onto are, they're just cheesy kind of quotes, but they just mean so much. And it's like, the first one is like, oh no, I'm going to forget this. It's like, remember how far you've come, because I can't remember the whole thing, but it's to remember how far you've come, because if you were able to actually go back and reflect like where you were a week ago, or even like a month ago, years ago, whatever it may be, you're not where you were before. And so I think that's a big one for me. And as well, knowing, and this is kind of ties into Instagram as Wes guessed a little bit as well, is just like knowing that where I am right now is where I'm supposed to be, in that I shouldn't get caught up with what my teammates are doing or what my colleagues are doing or friends or whatever it may be. Like where I am in life, wherever it may be, is where I am supposed to be. Does anyone else have any type of mantra or anything that they want to share as well?
So I think it's 4:30. Ashley sent me a 15 minutes alert that I just noticed 4 minutes ago.
Yeah, no problem.
So we got a little sidetracked. I lost track of time. But I'm really excited to have had this chance to like pick your brain a little bit about practical philosophy and mental well-being. Seems like you have a pretty good head on your shoulder, but like you're also very honest with yourself. And so thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. And I know for a fact people took away something practical. I know I did. But if anybody has any last minute questions they want to ask Jane, now's the time, or forever hold your peace, or email her. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. If you have any questions, by all means, I can hang around for a couple minutes longer. Otherwise, if you do have any questions, like I'm on LinkedIn or Instagram, or like just reach out and I'll for sure get back to you. So I appreciate you all coming and joining today. And like Michelle said, I hope there was a little tidbit that everyone kind of took away here. And as well, like I definitely learned some stuff from you, Michelle. So thank you. Thank you everybody for having me.